Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be going down a pretty dark path, I'd say. We're exploring all the creepiest creatures and locations that are found in the Harry Potter series. You know, you gave me this YouTube video to watch, and honestly, it's got me kind of thinking twice about reading the books at night.
It is interesting, isn't it, how a world that was designed for children can hold so much dark. But you know, that contrast is actually what makes all these elements so compelling. You know, it's like finding a hidden room in a house you thought you knew, right? Unsettling, but impossible to just ignore.
Yeah, I get that. And this video dives right into that, starting with the creatures. And one that really stood out to me, maybe because I've always been a little freaked out by horses, is the thestral, skeletal horse with bat wing. Talk about nightmare fuel. But what really gets to me is that they're invisible to anyone who hasn't actually witnessed death.
That's a really smart move by Rowling, I think. Using this creature to represent such an abstract idea, it's not just about the spooky looks, it's about the way that it can isolate. Only those who have experienced that kind of loss can actually see the thestral. Just like they can truly understand the depth of someone else.
It makes you wonder, if you could suddenly see a thestral, would that be like a good thing, a sign of personal growth, or just a really, really bad day?
That's a really good question, and it speaks to the ambiguity of the thestral, doesn't it? Are they symbols of darkness and death, or are they simply creatures that are attuned to a part of life that so many of us choose to ignore?
Okay, let's move on to something maybe a little less philosophical, but equally terrifying. The trolls. The video mentions that their roars, their wordless roars, are super unsettling.
Totally agree. That primal, almost unthinking aggression is what makes them so disturbing. It's not cutting or strategy like some of the other creatures. It's pure instinctual rage.
That's interesting there, how trolls are often used for comedic relief in the books. Like, remember that total disaster of a Yule Ball?
Exactly. That juxtaposition of humor and horror is another one of Rowling's tools. It makes the trolls less predictable and honestly even more unnerving because you never know if they're going to be like smashing their way through a feast or, well, you know, trying to dance.
And speaking of unpredictable, we have to talk about Fluffy, the three-headed guard dog. I mean, the name Fluffy is honestly creepy just because it clashes so hard with how dangerous he actually is.
It's like calling a great white shark Sparky, you know? It lulls you into this false sense of security, which just makes the reality even more jarring.
Yeah, that moment when Harry, Ron, and Hermione encounter Fluffy for the first time. Talk about heart-stopping tension. You know, he's guarding something important, but you have no idea what. All you see are those three giant slobbering heads.
Classic suspense building. Rowling uses Fluffy not just as a monster, but as a barrier, right? Forcing the characters and also us, the readers, to confront the unknown.
Okay, ready for a bit of a creature shift here. Let's talk werewolves. I mean, the fear of transforming, of losing control, that's like a horror staple for a reason.
Definitely. And Rowling uses that so brilliantly with Remus Lupin, right? You see his struggle with the condition, this internal battle between his human side and the wolfed inside. It's a very visceral representation of our own inner demons, right? The parts of ourselves that we might fear or try to suppress.
Makes werewolves a little more tragic than some of the other creatures on the list, because there's a very human element to their suffering.
Definitely. And that duality is what makes them so fascinating. Are they monsters to be feared, or are they victims of a curse that they just can't control? It's a question that lingers long after you finish.
Right. I'm going to need a little mental preparation for this next one. Let's talk about acromantula. I'm not a fan of spiders as it is, but giant intelligent spiders with a taste for human flesh, nope, I'm out.
They're definitely high on the creep factor scale. And it is, you're right, it is their intelligence that makes them truly terrifying. You know, they aren't just mindless beasts. They're reacting on pure instinct. They can plan, they can strategize, they can even hold grudges.
Like Aragog and his colony in the Forbidden Forest. Those scenes in the book gave me serious chills.
They play on that classic fear of the unknown and uncontrollable, and it's just magnified, right? When you combine it with a creature that's already considered creepy by many, the acromantula are like this reminder that intelligence doesn't always equal goodness, and sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones that can actually think like.
Well, if we're talking about creatures that can think, then we have to mention the basilisk, a giant snake that can kill you with a single glance. That's straight out of Nightmare. And the fact that it uses the Hogwarts plumbing system to get around, I'll never look at a bathroom sink the same way again.
The basilisk is a great example of how Rowling blends those real-world fears with mythology. I mean, the idea of a creature with a petrifying, rooted in ancient legend. But by having it lurk in the pipes, she brings that fear into a very familiar, everyday set. It's like this reminder that danger can lurk anywhere, even in seemingly safe space.
Okay, so we've talked about creatures that have terrifying roars and creatures that can kill you with a single glance. But what about creatures that drain the very life out of you? Dementor. The video describes them as soul-sucking horrors, and I don't think that's an exaggeration.
Dementors are fascinating from a psychological perspective. They don't just represent physical danger. They embody despair, despair, hopelessness, the absence of joy, their ability to drain the happiness from a place. It's like a literal representation of how depression can.
And Harry's reaction to them is so visceral. Even after he learns the Patronus charm, there's still this deep-seated fear that lingers.
That speaks to the depth of the trauma that they represent, right? They're a reminder that some wounds, even if healed, leave scars that can ache when exposed to the right trigger.
I'm starting to realize that darkness in Harry Potter is so much more than just monsters, scary monsters. It's about facing the things that truly terrify us, whether they're physical threats or the shadows in our own minds.
Exactly. And that's what makes this, this whole deep dive so interesting. We're not just cataloging creepy creatures, we're exploring the nature of fear itself.
So we talked about creatures that kind of embody our darkest fear. I want to explore the places in the Harry Potter world that really give us the creep. The video mentions Nocturnally, and I remember that feeling of dread that I felt when Harry accidentally stumbles into it in the second book.
Yeah, Nocturnally, it's fascinating because it represents that underbelly of the wizarding world, right? It's where the light and dark now kind of blur.
It's like the forbidden section of the library, but on a much bigger scale and a lot more dangerous.
Exactly. It's a place that plays on our natural curiosity, our fascination with forbidden, the taboo.
And the fact that characters like Draco Malfoy and Tom Riddle have connections to Nocturnally only amplifies that whole sinister nature.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even in the magical world, there are places where evil can thrive.
Speaking of places with a dark history, the Chamber of Secrets has to be high on the list of creepy locations. I mean, a hidden chamber deep beneath a school filled with unknown danger. That's like horror movie 101.
The Chamber of Secrets is brilliant because it plays on our fear of the unknown. It's a secret space that's been hidden for centuries. And, that isolation breeds fear. The build-up to its discovery, the whispers and legends surrounding it, all contribute to that really chilling atmosphere.
And the giant snake statues lining the pathway. I remember reading that part and thinking, nope, I would not be walking down there alone.
That statues definitely add to the creep factor. I mean, they're a reminder of Salazar Slytherin's legacy, his prejudice against Muggle-borns, and the lengths that he was willing to go to protect his vision of a pure-blood wizarding world.
Makes you wonder if those statues are kind of symbolic of something dormant within Hogwarts itself, or is the chamber more like an infected appendix, something harmful that needed to be removed?
That's a fascinating question, and it really gets to the heart of what makes the Chamber of Secrets so unsettling, doesn't it? It suggests that even places that seem safe, like Hogwarts, can harbor dark, within their foundations.
Okay, shifting gears a bit here, let's talk about cursed objects. The video mentions a few that really stood out, like the Hand of Glory, a severed hand that immobilizes with its gaze. Yeah, that's a hard pass for me.
The Hand of Glory is a great example of how Rowling uses objects to embody dark magic and, its corrupting influence. It's not just an object, it's a severed part of a human being, imbued with that dark power.
Yeah, it's almost like a physical manifestation of a dark thought or intention.
That's an interesting way to think about it. It's not just about the object itself, but about the power it represents and the intentions of those who wield.
And then there's the Tale of the Three Brothers. I know it's a fictional story within the Harry Potter world, but it still creeps me out. It's like a grim fairy tale. And the fact that it foreshadows events in the series just makes it more unsettling.
Yeah, the Tale of the Three Brothers is a perfect example of how Rowling uses storytelling to layer, meaning and foreshadowing. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking power and the inevitability of death.
It makes you wonder if those fairy tales are more than just stories in the wizarding world. Maybe they hold deeper truth, warnings passed down through generations.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it, that these stories, often told to children, might actually contain hidden warning about the nature of magic and the dangers of the world.
Speaking of dangerous, we can't forget the Mirror of Error. The idea of seeing your deepest desires reflected back at you is both alluring and terrifying, right? It's like that saying, be careful what you wish for.
The Mirror of Erist is a powerful symbol of the seductive nature of our desire and the dangers of it. It shows us what we long for, but it also warns us about the potential for those desires soon.
Makes me wonder if the Mirror of Erist is more than just a magical object. Maybe it's a reflection of something that exists within all of us. That yearning for something more, something better.
That's a profound thought, isn't it? It suggests that the Mirror of Erist isn't just about magic, but about the human condition, our constant striving for something just beyond our grasp.
All right, let's dive into the realm of abstract fear. The video focuses on boggarts, Inferi, and Voldemort. Let's start with boggarts. They're like the ultimate personalized fear, taking on the form of whatever scares you most.
Boggarts are fascinating because they represent the power of our own minds, to create fear.
Sometimes our imaginations can conjure up things far scarier than anything we could encounter in the real world.
Exactly. And that's what makes boggarts so compelling. They're not just monsters, they're reflections of our own anxieties and fears.
Okay, moving on to something a bit more tangible. The Inferi, reanimated corpses. I think my nightmares are already booked for the next month.
And fairy tap into a very primal fear, the fear of death and the desecration of the body. They represent that violation of the natural order, the idea that death is not an ending, but a transformation into something monstrous and unfamiliar.
And the way they're described in the book, decaying flesh, blank eyes, moving with this unnatural stillness, is like they're stuck between life and death, and that in-between state is truly horrifying.
That sense of liminality, of being neither alive nor dead, is incredibly unsettling. It challenges our understanding of what it means to be human, and it raises all these questions about the boundaries.
Speaking of challenging boundaries, let's talk about the biggest bad of them all, Lord Voldemort. The video talks about how he embodies fear itself, using it as a weapon to control others.
Voldemort is a complex character who represents that seductive nature of power and the dangers of unchecked ambition. He utilizes fear as a tool. He understands its ability to paralyze and control.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? He spends his life trying to conquer death to become all-powerful, but he loses, ultimately because of his inability to comprehend the power of human connection and empathy.
That's the brilliance of Voldemort's character. He represents that shadow self, right? The part of us that craves power and control at the expense of passion. His defeat is a reminder that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in embracing vulnerability.
So we've talked about creatures, locations, objects, and even abstract concepts like fear. But the video saves what it considers the most terrifying element for last: Dementors. And I have to admit, those things give me the chill.
Dementors are in a league of their own when it comes to terror. They represent a fate worse than death, the loss of hope, happiness, and the very essence of one.
I remember reading about the Dementor's kiss and feeling physically ill. The idea of having your soul sucked out, leaving you an empty shell, it's just too horrific to contemplate.
The Dementor's kiss is a particularly disturbing concept because it represents a complete annihilation of the self. You know, it's not just physical death, it's the erasure of everything that makes a person unique and individual.
The video also talks about how Dementors are linked to depression, and that connection makes them even more chilling. It's like they represent a kind of spiritual or emotional death that could be just as devastating as physical death.
That's what makes Dementors so terrifying. They tap into a very real and very deeply personal fear. The fear of losing ourselves, of becoming empty and hope. It's a fear that resonates with anyone who's ever experienced depression or despair.
And Harry's intense fear of them makes them even more unsettling. It's like they trigger something deep within him, a reminder of the trauma he's endured and the darkness that still lingers in his life.
Harry's visceral reaction to Dementor speaks to the enduring power of trauma and the lasting impact of loss. They represent the darkest parts of his past and the ever-present threat of despair. But his ability to overcome his fear and learn to defend himself against them, it's a testament to his courage and resilience.
This deep dive is making me appreciate how much darkness is kind of woven into the fabric of the Harry Potter world. You know, it's not just about spooky creatures and scary places. It's about confronting our deepest fear and acknowledging the shadows that exist within us all.
And that's what makes it so brilliant. Rowling doesn't shy away from exploring difficult themes and confronting these uncomfortable truths about human nature. You know, even in a world of magic and wonder, she reminds us that darkness is an inherent part of life, and facing our fears is essential to our growth.
Makes you realize that darkness isn't always something to be feared. Sometimes confronting the shadows is what allows us to find the light. As we've been talking about all these creepy creatures and locations, you know, it's got me thinking about the lack of safety in the wizarding world.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these kids are always running into danger, and it's not like Hogwarts has, you know, a great security system.
That's a really good point. There's a definite sense of vulnerability in the Harry Potter world, right? You always feel like danger is lurking around every corner. And it's heightened by the fact that these magical threats just completely defy logic and reason.
Yeah. You never know what's going to come, like bursting out of the Forbidden Forest or swimming up from the Great Lake.
Oh, the lake!
And speaking of the Great Lake, how can anyone relax knowing there are creepy merpeople and grindylows down there? Those things are like the stuff of nightmares.
The Great Lake is a great example of how Rowling uses setting to evoke that sense of unease, right? You've got this vast, murky expanse, and you never know what's hidden beneath the surface.
It's like the lake itself is another character.
Yeah.
This constant reminder that even in a place that seems familiar and safe, there are still those unknown depths and hidden dangers.
Exactly. It's not just about the creatures themselves. It's about the atmosphere. That unsettling atmosphere that kind of permeates the whole environment. It's like that feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by forces you just can't control.
And it's not just the creatures either. I
Right.
mean, Hogwarts itself has moving staircases and secret passages and ghosts rolling the halls. It feels like the castle is designed to be disorienting and unpredictable.
Definitely. That sense of constant change, of never knowing where you are or what might be lurking around the corner, it contributes to that feeling of unease, like the castle itself is alive, and not always in a good way.
Okay, I need to circle back to Dementors for a second. We've talked about them a bit, but the video really emphasizes why they are the most terrifying thing in the Harry Potter world, even more so than Voldemort.
I think it comes down to this, that Dementors represent a very primal fear. The fear of losing ourselves, of becoming empty shells. Voldemort is powerful and he's dangerous, but he's still human. He's still driven by desires and ambitions that we can at least understand Dementors. They represent something way more abstract and unsettling.
They're like the embodiment of despair and hopelessness.
Right.
And their presence evokes this reaction that goes beyond just normal fear. It's like they tap into something deep down in our psyches,
Yeah.
something that makes us question the very nature of our existence.
That's a powerful thought. They're not just creatures. They're symbols of the darkness that I think exists within us all. The potential for emptiness and despair that can just consume us if we're not careful.
Yeah, it's like they're this constant reminder that the greatest battle we face isn't against any external threats. It's against the shadows within our own minds.
That speaks to the deeper themes that Rowling explores in the series, right? The real horror isn't just about monsters and curse. It's about the capacity for darkness that exists in every human heart.
This deep dive has been quite the journey. We've explored so much. The creatures, the locations, the objects, even the nature of fear itself. What stands out to you as the most chilling element of darkness in the Harry Potter world?
For me, it's the way Rowling blends the magical with the mundane. She brings that horror into everyday setting. It's not about fantastical creatures in this far off. It's about the fear that can lurk in the shadows of our own life, the darkness that can creep into our own heart.
Yeah, that's what makes Harry Potter so compelling. It's this world of magic and wonder, but it also reflects our own fears and our anxiety. And ultimately, it reminds us that even when faced with darkness, there's always hope, there's always courage, and the power of love to guide us through.
Absolutely well said. And it leaves us with a question for you, the listener. What aspect of darkness in the Harry Potter world resonates most and why? Until next time, may your journey be filled with light and maybe just a touch of healthy fear to keep things